Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we will be focusing on the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown and how some of the major industries in India are coping up with the pandemic. My name is Bennett Fernandez, and I'm the Global Marketing Manager here at ISI Emerging Markets. Today's webinar will be presented by two of our colleagues, Rohini Sanyal, she is our research economist for India, and Georgi Ninov, who is our senior researcher at ISI. So this is our fifth webinar that we are hosting on the topic of COVID-19, and a lot has changed since the first one we hosted back in February of this year. India now is the third hardest hit country from the COVID-19 pandemic globally after the US and Brazil. The confirmed cases in the country have increased exponentially, and despite having one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. Virtually all the key industries in India have experienced major operational challenges, pushing the economy into recession. So before we dig deeper into this topic, just a brief overview of who we are and what we do as a company, specifically for those who are joining in and not our subscribers. ISI Emerging Markets Group has been in the business of providing emerging market information for over 25 years. We have two brands, EMIS and CEIC. Our EMIS brand focuses on providing company, industry, and country research on emerging economies. And CEIC, on the other hand, focuses on providing macroeconomic and industry data on emerging economies as well. The content that we are using in this presentation today is drawn from our recently released EMIS COVID-19 Briefing Impact Report on India, which is now available to all subscribers, but we are also making it available to all the non-subscribers who are joining in for this webinar today. So just a brief overview of our presenters before we get started. Georgi Ninov is our first presenter, and he is our senior researcher at ISI, and he has been working with ISI since 2015, and he plays a very pivotal role in our research and development team. He massively contributes to our quarterly macroeconomic snapshot reports, along with other first and proprietary research publications that we make available to our subscribers. Rohini Sanyal, she is our second presenter for the session, and she has been working with ISI since 2019 and has a background in economics. She graduated with a master's in economics from the University of Warwick in the UK, and has 5 years of experience working with some of the well-known research institutions in India, like the Indian Council for Research and Economic Research, as well as the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. She's also worked for Bain & Company, which is one of the worldwide popular known management consultancy firm. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping points to help us interact during this webinar. During the session, at any time, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So all you need to do is submit your questions using the question panel that is to your right. We will be having a Q&A session just after the presentation, where our presenters will start answering questions in the order that they have come in. We have also uploaded today's presentation in the handout section that is just above the question panel, so please feel free to download it. Towards the end of the webinar, we will be having or hosting a short survey. We would really appreciate your feedback. It really helps us create more engaging, interesting topics on emerging markets. So we would really appreciate if you could, help us with a short feedback from your side. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Georgi for the first part of the presentation, followed by Rohini, who will follow after Georgi. So after that, we will start taking Q&A sessions. So with that said, over to you, Georgi.
Thank you, Bennett. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. First, let's take a quick look to the agenda for today. We will begin with an overview of the Indian economy and the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown using our proprietary CSL indicator. After that, we will be exploring the impact of the 14 key sectors using our proprietary EMIS Trend Deviation Index. and we'll be discussing the level of impact and the recovery rate of the various industries of India. So let's start with the quick macroeconomic overview of the performance of the Indian economy as of lately. We will do that using the CAC leading indicator. You can see it on the chart in front of you. So this is a proprietary product of CIC, a composite leading indicator, the goal of which is to give early signals of turning points of the business cycle. It is standardized between 50 and 150, and as you can see from the chart, with 100 being the long-term trend of the series. You can see this long-term trend is marked with this red dashed line. So to interpret the leading indicator, continuous performance above 100 means that the economy is in expansionary phase, and vice versa. Values below, continuous values below 100 signify slowdown. I guess that most of you are familiar with leading indicators. So the main goal of the leading indicator is that indicators such as the GDP are lagging, meaning that data, for instance, for India, GDP release is, I think, will be at the end of August, with data for April to June, meaning that we have around 2 months, like, or more even, for between this the information that we get and the economic activity. And the point of the indicator is to give these signals early. So looking at the chart again, we know that the Indian economy had troubles even before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Real GDP deceleration began in the second calendar quarter of 2018. However, due to the expansionary monetary policy of Central Bank of India, the indicator started showing signs of improvement, as you can see from the chart, since November 2019, and actually it did climb to a 20-year high of 119.69 in February. So according to the CAC leading indicator, India was actually heading towards a turning point in the business cycle, even though the GDP data was still showing deceleration. However, after that, COVID-19 happened. So actually, the first cases of COVID-19 in India were in January, but there were just very few. The rapid increase in COVID-19 cases happened in March. So the government adopted a pan-India lockdown on March 25th, which was later extended until the end of May. So what this means essentially that almost all economic activity remained closed, except for some essential services. This had a strongly adverse effect on the economy, as expected, of course, and the indicator plunged to 86.2 in March and 49.5 in April, which was the lowest value on record, and even below troughs such as the one during the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. You can clearly, I think, see from the chart. In the following months, the negative effects were partly mitigated by some prompt policy action by the central bank and the Indian government. In May, CAC leading indicator had only a negligible rebound to 52.7, but in June it jumped to 80.1. This happened on the back of increasing consumption and industrial activity, mainly improvement in vehicle sales, electricity generation, and steel production. However, the long-term situation still remains precarious, as shown by the smooth CAC leading indicator. You can see it on the chart in front of you with the sky blue line. The idea of the smooth CAC leading indicator. So the difference between the two is that the smooth one removes high frequency noise from the series, and because of that, it is more reliable for assessing the long-term performance of the economy. So as you can see, all these spikes of the dark blue line, which is the actual CSL indicator, the non-smoothed one, are not present in the light blue line, which is smooth leading indicator. So basically, that's the goal, is to remove this temporary spikes. As you can see from the chart, the peak performance of the non-smooth CSL leading indicator in the end of at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020 was not repeated in the smoothed indicator, and actually showed that the economy started to slow down again since mid 2019. Also, unlike the non-smoothed or the actual CSL leading indicator, the smoothed one is still declining as of June, meaning that there is a possibility that this uptick that we witnessed in May and especially in June could be only temporary. Bottom line is that the non-smoothed CSL leading indicator reacts more quickly to changes in the environment, as we can see from the spikes in, say, June, while the smoothed indicator shows whether these changes are actually sustainable in the long term, whether we actually have a turning point or not. So in this case, we can hope that we see a turning point in the smoothed indicator soon as well, which would mean that April 2020 was actually a turning point indeed, and not just and the values after that were not just temporary spikes. Based on this performance, we can assume that the severe damage caused by COVID-19 on the Indian economy is still there. We're not out in the clear, and more pronounced recovery is needed to get the economy back to its potential pre-crisis. In order to do that, the government has introduced a fiscal stimulus package of 20 trillion rupees. I think it was called in English Self-Reliant India. It was equivalent to 10% of the GDP of the country, and covering a range of short and long-term measures to help boost businesses and domestic demand. I'm not going to get into that in detail about that. It's not the point of this webinar. And yeah, after this macroeconomic quick presentation and introduction, our local expert Rohini will take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Georgi. Hi, everyone. We will now come to our proprietary EMS Trend Deviation Index that captures the impact of COVID-19 on the 14 key sectors in India. As Georgi already mentioned, the lockdown in India has had a very adverse effect on the overall economy, and of course that has percolated to all of the industries. So using the Trend Deviation Index, we have actually identified 3 levels of impact from the pandemic. And we've classified it into major, moderate, and minor impact, taking the values for the month of April, because the lockdown was started at the end of March, and April bore the main impact of the hard lockdown that was put in place. So those with the score of above 60 have been classified as minor impact, and those between 40 and 60 are moderately impacted, while those below 40 are the ones which are majorly impacted. So we find that industries which were classified as essential services had a high share of digital operations. They fared better, such as agriculture, energy, and the banking and insurance sectors, which recorded a major negative impact from the pandemic in April. Furthermore, we find that industries that rely mostly on on-site operations were the hardest hit, such as automotive, consumer electronics, consumer retail, and of course the tourism and leisure sectors, which were probably one of the hardest hit, right? Some industries had a moderate impact, as I discussed, and these were like food and beverage sector, chemicals, mining and metals, which witnessed more of supply chain disruptions and a reduced demand from other sectors, key institutional clients in India. And this was sort of exacerbated by the migrant labor crisis, the shortage of work that was caused by their returns to their hometowns. So since this index measures the deviation from short-term trends, we are also actually able to see a recovery for all of these sectors, although in various degrees. In fact, certain industries have also managed to jump back to their short-term trends, such as agriculture, as you can see here. The June value has come back to 104.5. So we map the level of impact against the recovery rate, and we arrive at this matrix, which basically gives a snapshot on the overall status of all the 14 industries. So the level of impact recovery rate matrix, you can see that all of the majorly impacted industries are clustered in the delayed recovery rate region. So consumer electronics, infrastructure, technology, all of these which have been majorly impacted are now in the delayed recovery, while the ones which underwent moderate impact or minor impact are sort of split between slow and quick recoveries. So many industries witnessed a fairly quick recovery, like food and beverage, and even pharma and healthcare. And they have virtually returned back to their pre-COVID-19 levels, as you can see here in the chart, in the table as well. For those like banking and insurance, chemicals, they are on track of a recovery, beg your pardon, but they have been more impacted because of the sluggish, domestic demand. However, for those which are the hardest hit, all of the sectors have a delayed recovery, and they continue to be impaired by a combination of government restrictions, depressed domestic and maybe foreign demand as well. And of course, there are some intrinsic structural problems for many of the sectors. Moving on to the industries which are taking a lead in recovery. So we have, we have 5 sectors, which are agriculture, pharma and healthcare, food and beverage, mining and metals, and transportation. These have been divided into, you can see, minor and moderate impact, but all of them are in our quick recovery zone. So going over to the industries, agriculture was actually one of the few essential services which was allowed operations as early as March 28th. But there were severe supply chain disruptions through the entire chain, and there was, of course, the lack of farm workers created by the migrant labor crisis. We use a couple of proxy indicators to see what the impact on the industry has been. We use farm tractor sales and fertilizer sales for urea. And you can see that the farm tractor sales have plunged for actually starting March, and then furthermore in April. But interestingly, for April, the fertilizer sales sort of bounced back. So that was, you can see a more resilient indicator there, probably reflecting the fact that agriculture was exempt from the lockdown. This sector is now under the special focus of the government, called the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, as many of you might know it. It translates to self-reliant India, and agriculture actually had its own special presentation from the finance ministry to give a major boost to our farmers. So one of the key changes that was made was an amendment in the Essential Commodities Act, and that will allow farmers to sell their produce under any market, and they will be able to realize better prices for these produce. So there's not going to be much of government regulation on that. The pharmaceuticals and healthcare sector on the right, you can see, also underwent like supply chain disruptions during the period of hard lockdown, which can be seen in the the sharp dip in both the indicators, which are exports of drugs and the production of pharmaceutical products. However, interestingly, you'll see that after March, in April, the exports actually rise. And this was basically on the back of the ban on exports that was lifted by government in April. And yeah, there was big demand globally for the drug hydroxychloroquine. And I'm not sure how many of you know, India is actually one of the biggest exporters of hydrochloroquine. So we actually gained some on that. There was an increase in the demand for Indian herbs and Ayurveda-based medicines. And you can, that was the result of the Ministry of Ayurveda, Yoga, and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, Homeopathy, and in short, it's known as Ayush. So the ministry put out a health advisory, encouraging the use of Indian traditional medicine, and that saw a big spike in demand for all these Indian herbs and health supplements, immunity boosters. So moving on to food and beverage, which had a moderate impact. The essential services, these were also classified under essential services, but they suffered losses from the vanishing demand in bars, in restaurants, and there was additional stress from the ban on sale of alcohol. And it's actually a major revenue generator for states, but it was completely stopped until I think the end of it was until the end of the hard lockdown, which was on May 3rd. After which there was some easing was done, and there were different states where liquor sale was allowed. Some states even started home deliveries so that there's not crowding in the marketplaces. The sector is expected to continue this uptick in demand, and it's supported by exports. Moving over to mining and metals. This was also one of the industries that were allowed operations during the lockdown under the banner of essential services, but they had negative effects from the movement restrictions, shortage of workers, a decreasing demand from key institutional buyers like automotive and the construction sectors. But the sector has had a very quick recovery because of increased exports of iron ore. And you can see that here in the iron ore exports surged to about 10% year-on-year growth, which is excellent and better than other, in fact, the months prior to that too. So, and this increase in iron ore exports took place because India benefited from the disruptions in the global supply chains and the shortage of price competitive low-grade iron ore. So yes, the sector is slated for a quick recovery, and hopefully there's going to be a large improvement in the foreseeable future. Coming next to transportation, we see that this has been moderately impacted. Although transportation was one of the industries which saw a complete halt at the very beginning of the lockdown, but the movement of essential goods were allowed, and this sort of helped mitigate the impact on the overall sector. The sector is slated to make a quick recovery as the movement has resumed and the restrictions have been eased. Barring that, of course, the international air carriers. Railways are running special trains under the banner of Shramik Express, and these are basically aimed to transport stranded people from their from wherever they are to their own homes. And furthermore, we have also seen that taxis and cabs and auto rickshaws have been allowed to operate, although there are restrictions on the operations of these modes of transport. For taxis, only 2 passengers are allowed to be seated. But yes, despite all of that, the sector is slated to make a good recovery in the future, and we can already see the signs here in our graph that for May and June, the impact has been lesser and lesser. Okay, now moving over to industries which are headed for a slower recovery. In this, we have the banking and the insurance sector, the energy sector, which are on the minor impact, and then chemicals, which are more moderately impacted. So the minor impact, banking and insurance, the reason banking and insurance had a minor impact was because the RBI was very quick to implement a lot of different strategies for the sector to work in a seamless manner. Of course, there was a great pressure on maintaining liquidity in the overall financial market, but RBI has done that quite well. They've raised, I think on the 27th of March, they came up with a monetary policy and they increased the marginal standing facility, they lowered the repo rate, and basically tried from their end to push the system into a more easy mechanism. However, the paralysis of the economic activity and the reduced demand for like new loans, that is likely to worsen the overall credit portfolio of all banks. And although we don't have data right now, we might be seeing an increase in the NPAs, which the banking sector has worked very hard to reduce over the years. But as a one-off impact, perhaps there would be an increase in the NPAs. Insurance companies, on the other hand, have seen higher claims in life and property insurance segments, which have been coupled with lower demand for insurance coverage from hardest hit sectors, like, let's say, because no one's buying cars, so we don't have a lot of insurance coming in from that sector. But a partial relief did come from, the rising demand for health insurance, and as the pandemic forced everyone to think about buying health insurance. So on the overall, the sector has been impacted, but we do expect a slow recovery, probably over the next few months. In the energy sector on the right-hand side, has proven to be, well, relatively resilient in some ways to the pandemic. There's just been a minor impact on this. Electricity generation did drop in April as industries remained closed and renewable energy. But renewable energy has been largely unaffected because renewable energy has a must-run status by the government. So the entire burden of the lower demand has been shifted on to thermal power plants. The other, petroleum, the other energy products like crude oil, natural gas, petroleum, have experienced a fall in their rate, but now the decline is improving. Going forward, one of the biggest concerns will remain with the financially stressed distribution companies, and the government has announced about 900 billion rupees to help out these stressed discoms, as they're popularly called, the distribution companies, under the Atmanirbhar Bharat. This sector is expected to slowly recover from the pandemic. Moving on to the moderately impacted sector, which is chemicals. Now, chemicals were allowed to function during the lockdown, but it's been impacted mainly because of the close linkages it has with other sectors, similar to like mining and metals. There's been a decrease in demand for chemicals from again from institutional buyers, but a little respite came in the form of demand from pharmaceutical sector and from maybe the food sector. So this has been mitigated a little bit. The rate of decline has slowed substantially for both production and exports, as you can see here. In fact, exports have increased in June, which is very good news for the industry. The sector is slated to make a slow recovery, but India has been seeing an increased global demand for chemicals, and as I mentioned, that you can see that in the uptick in exports here. Going over to industries that are headed for a delayed recovery. Now, something that you will observe in the first go is all of these industries are under the major impact. So they've all been affected in quite an adverse way. The result of the government restriction and the depressed domestic demand have just added on to sectors, and of course, which is one of the reasons that the sector will have a more delayed recovery. If we go on to the majorly impacted first two sectors. Consumer electronics has been largely impacted as a result of production remaining closed until the lockdown was eased. And even now, there are severe capacity constraints in terms of the number of people who can actually work in these manufacturing plants. And it's just about 33% of the number of employees. So the sector has suffered from supply side disruptions and shortages of imported commodities. Shortage of imported components from China, especially because of the lockdown globally in parts here and there, and of course the movement restrictions. As the lockdown was eased, there was a lot of demand for all the pent-up demand, if I may say, for electronic goods and products. Mobile phone sales pushed for a while, so did that for ACs and television sets. But there has been considerable inventory pile-up, and the production is likely to have a very, very gradual increase over the next few months. For technology, media, and telecom, the sector has seen sort of mixed results, maybe because of the broad definition of the sector. On one hand, we've had demand for broadband and telecom services, which have increased as a result of the work from home, for maybe just a certain section of the workforce, but yet there has been an increase in demand. This could also be linked to an increase in demand for entertainment services, the at-home entertainment services through online platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime. But the production of the movies, the films, the television shows have had to be closed during the entire period of the lockdown, and that has impacted the media sector quite substantially. A lot of projects have been delayed for indefinitely. But yes, maybe slowly the sector is coming back. The IT service and business process outsourcing firms have been adversely impacted due to a decrease in global demand. India is one of the major exporters of IT services, and a subdued global demand has just added to the woes of the entire sector. Going on to infrastructure and construction, we have infrastructure and construction activities were permitted in rural areas after April 15th, but the sector has suffered from lockdown restrictions in majorly the urban areas, and also due to shortage from the migrant laborers returning back, or reverse migration. In light of the subdued domestic demand and heightened uncertainty in the current situation, the home buying decisions are most likely to be postponed until much later. Also, as more and more companies shift to a work from home setup, there is a likely impact that may be seen on the commercial real estate. So this overall sector had been facing issues even before the pandemic started, which was caused by demonetization and the GST, and also the introduction of RERA, which is the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act. So the sector is expected to have quite a bit of a prolonged recovery. Going over to the tourism and leisure sector, as you can well imagine, this is one of the worst impacted sectors. The effects of the pandemic and the lockdown were felt across the entire value chain of the tourism and leisure sector. And more importantly, the sector has a lot of informally employed people, and we cannot even estimate the kind of loss that may have happened on that front, because the chain starts with hotels and restaurants, but it goes down to travel agents, travel guides, souvenir businesses, small memento businesses. So you can well imagine the level of impact on this sector. Now, international travel is still banned and the tourist visas still remain cancelled. India has seen a sharp fall in the foreign exchange earnings. As you can see, we have data only till March so far, but it wouldn't be wrong to estimate that these have been pretty much zero since the lockdown started. Some of the hotels have now been allowed to operate since June 8th, when the first phase of unlocking started. And many states have opened up their borders, like Goa, Uttarakhand, and even Maharashtra. But there are quite a few restrictions if you want to travel to these places. I think for some of the states, they also require mandatory COVID tests. The recovery for the sector is definitely going to be prolonged, mainly because of the ban on foreign tourists who are one of the major consumers of this sector. The recovery will be based on the easing of the government restrictions and the movement of both domestic and foreign tourists. Domestic demand may pick up a little bit in the future, but it's unlikely to pick up a lot, as people stay in their homes and the fear of the disease is still active throughout the population. Coming to our last two sectors, consumer durables. As you can well imagine, again, that the consumer durables and consumer goods and retail have been impacted in a very, very dire way. All the stores have remained closed. This sector actually had a supply and a demand shock. The sector was not allowed to operate during the period of the hard lockdown until May 3rd. And even after the phased reopening of the economy, many states did not allow marketplaces to function in their normal ways. Many of you may know that the state of Delhi implemented this arbitrary approach of odd and even stores being open, but it did not work out. And essentially, all of the stores are now open in marketplaces. Malls have also been allowed to function, although there are several restrictions on the entry of people in stores, maximum number of people in any particular store. So as long as these remain, the impact on the consumer durable sector is likely to exist. However, a little respite will be from the e-commerce platform. The lockdown has pushed a lot of companies to open online stores and do home deliveries instead of buying in store. There has been a fall in the production of consumer durables, of course, as a result of the lower demand. And of course, going forward, the recovery will be quite gradual. Last but not the least, well, the automotive sector, which was, according to our Trend Deviation Index, one of the worst impacted. It was the worst impacted sector. And since it was classified as non-essential, this was also sort of exacerbated by the sluggish domestic demand and the unwillingness of people to invest in vehicles that started prior to the outbreak of the pandemic. As you can see here, the sluggish demand has actually been there for quite some time. However, the April and the May values have been quite sharp in their decline. There was additional negative impact from the movement from the Bharat stage transition 4 to 6, which is our emission standard in India. The overall production and sale for the month of April were actually zero. So there's the Automobile Manufacturers Association was actually just they've just not addressed this data for that month. So I think it's okay to assume that it's zero. This is also translated to a lower production of automobiles because of inventory pileup, and of course there was sharp fall in the production index, as you can see on the blue lines here. Fall in the production index of automobiles, and going forward, we will see the we foresee that vehicle production will remain at low levels since there's been a lot of inventory buildup, and sales are expected to remain subdued as a result of lower demand for non-essential goods and people postponing their buying decisions until after pandemic is over. So that's all on the industries. The India COVID-19 impact briefing is actually third in the series of impact briefings that we are publishing after Brazil and China. The report was launched yesterday and it's currently available on the US platform. As Bandit mentioned, we will be sending the report to all our attendees. And yeah, that's all from my side. And back to you, Bandit.
Thank you, Rohini, and Georgi for some very good insights on the 14 key industries in India. I guess there's no surprises there that the transportation and tourism sectors have been affected the most, but it's interesting to see quick recoveries in sectors like pharma and agriculture, as you mentioned. So we've started receiving quite a lot of questions. Rohini, Georgi, I'm going to keep sending you questions as and when they arrive. I encourage everybody to use the question panel that's to your right to submit your questions, and we will start taking questions now. So the first question is for Georgi based on his first part of the presentation. The first question is, why has the smoothed CEIC leading indicator not gone up in June, despite the actual one jumping to 80?
Hi again. Okay. So the smoothed CEIC leading indicator is constructed to ignore noise. Means that it currently regards the sharp movement in June. It's a bit like a very sharp uptick. So the smoothed CEIC leading indicator is constructed to ignore such noise because it will wait for the growth to become sustainable. So if the performance of the actual indicator continues to improve, so like in the following months we see the trend going up and down, then the smoothed leading indicator will no longer see the post-April performance as momentary. Therefore, there is no turning point in the smoothed indicator as well. But if the economy continues to improve, we are sure to see a turning point in the smoothed indicator as well. And this would actually mean that the economy is actually improving at the pace that it should. Yeah, that's why I think I mentioned during the presentation that the smoothed leading indicator is probably the better measure for like long-term long-term condition of the business cycle compared to the non-smoothed one. But the non-smoothed one reacts quicker to any changes in the components, the fundamentals that are the leading indicators that are forming this composite leading indicator in India. By the way, if people are interested in the CEIC leading indicator, we have a web page dedicated to the CEIC leading indicator. The subscription is free. You can follow India and all of the other 7 regions that we currently cover right now. There's information about the methodology. There are more graphical representations. So if you're interested, you can check this for free. Or if you're a subscriber of the CEIC database, you can see it or download it from the database as well.
Thanks, Georgi. So since we are on the topic of the CEIC leading indicator, one of the attendees would like to know whether the trending deviation index data is accessible.
Currently, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the Trend Deviation Index is published only in the report. we gave as a handout. So I highly recommend for anyone to just to check the handout that we have in the webinar and download it and read it. It's a good read. Currently, we only publish the Trend Deviation Index in the reports. Actually, we also have calculated Trend Deviation indices for China and Brazil as well, which our subscribers can also find in this in the reports for these two countries as well. All our subscribers can find this this COVID-19 impact series on Index as well, and the trend deviation is there.
Thank you, Georgi. The next question is for Rohini, actually. And Rohini, the question is, on what basis was the classification of the recovery rate done, and why?
All right, thanks. Thanks for the question. Recovery rate was classified by taking into account the last available value for that particular sector. So for sectors which had June data, we've taken the value in June. And for those which only had data until May, we have considered the May data. And the classification is done in the manner that those industries which have a rank of a value of 99 or above have been classified as quick recovery, and those with values between 90 and 99 have been classified as slow recovery, and those below 90 have been classified as more delayed recovery. Now, the trend deviation index shows the deviations from the short-term perfect scores, which is basically 100. So I beg your pardon. So the recovery rate captures the pace of the movement, towards that short-term trend. So, for agriculture, you see that it's already above 100. As for like food and beverage, that's the idea of calculating the recovery rate.
Thanks, Rohini. Just another one for you, Rohini. This is from an attendee who's asking, government has pushed renewable energy utilization, expanding solar energy. The progress would be affected or delayed by COVID-19 and thermal coal demand for power. So how will it continue longer than planned is the question, I guess.
See, I think for all industries have been affected during the lockdown period, especially like if you're talking about pushing the solar energy, I mean to say the manufacturing and the development of solar energy, panels, or in areas, putting up solar plants. These would have been impacted for that period, but for now, it's clearly like there is a pickup that is coming through, and soon, at least for these activities, we will see more or less, I think, how do I say it? Back to short, like what it was before, we would probably be there. But in terms of like the demand for electricity, that remains to be seen yet. Although in our calculation, it's not affected in a very, very dire way, the electricity generation. It's not in the major impact. So that's, well, we can assume a better recovery for the power sector as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Rohini. So, Georgi, this is the next question for you, and I believe there are two of them that are almost similar. One is, does the Indian government prepare any financial stimulus package for recovery of the economy? Can you tell what they are? And the other question is also along the same line: how are the government stimulus and reforms expected to help the economy? So, just wondering if you could help with this question.
Sure. There's actually a section in our report dedicated to reforms as well. So I think as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the big economic stimulus package Self-Reliant India in English was launched in May 2020. The value was 20 trillion rupees, or 10% of GDP. Some of the measures that the government adopted to alleviate the lockdown negative effects of the lockdown are collateral-free loans to small businesses, loan moratoriums, cash transfers to low-income population, also I think working capital financing for farmers. These are so-called short-term measures. They are expected to have short-term impact on the economy. There are also structural reforms in place, changes in corporate laws to improve ease of doing business, amendment to the Essential Commodities Act, which puts an end to the government curbs on stocking on farm produce and allowing farmers to they realize better sale prices. These are a few of these government reforms that are going on, stimulus that the government is offering right now. We'll see the effect in the coming months, I guess. Yeah, again, check the report in the handout. There's a section about it as well.
Thanks, Georgi. The next one is for Rohini. This is on the consumer electronics sector. How do you predict the recovery of white goods, especially refrigerators, washing machines, TV, and audio systems?
We don't really predict a recovery of the white goods. This is basically just a pent-up demand that for the lockdown period, because it was summers in India and there was demand for AC and refrigerators, and maybe televisions because of people want to watch TV while they're working from home. But this was just a one-off sort of a case where the sector sort of recovered a little bit from those sales. But going forward, it may or may not be this way. Rather, I would say that the outlook is more subdued even in the future, as people are postponing their buying decisions. There is clearly a very sluggish domestic demand, and it is the luxury segments. Well, if I may classify these as luxury segments, then these are going to see the effects of the pandemic and the lockdown period. So not really a quick recovery for the white goods, but just a one-off case of where pent-up demand gave some respite to the sector. That's it.
Thanks, Rohini. Another question for you, Rohini. Is there a possibility of an industry not getting recovered at all, or might just take exceptionally a long time to recover from the 14 sectors that you have been speaking about?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as saying that they won't recover at all, because there is a lot of force that is coming from the government. We've seen the fiscal stimulus package, and the government is pushing quite a lot of development on all aspects of the economy, I would say, and primarily to boost demand. Some of the sectors, let's say automotive or maybe the construction sector, are seeing more structural problems. Perhaps, as I mentioned, for construction, there was a slow demand even before the pandemic, and that was being caused by, it was like trickle-down effects from demonetization, GST, and to some extent by the Regulation Act on the construction and real estate sector that was brought in. So these are expected to last for some time, although for India it's been an exceptionally long time, maybe because of the slowdown in demand as well. So I wouldn't say that sectors that some industry may not recover at all. I would say that some industries may recover more quickly, as we have also analyzed, and thanks to the government stimulus, some industries will perform much better very quickly, and then some are just slated for recovery in the longer term, maybe a period of 1 year or so even.
Thank you, Rohini. The next question is for Georgi, and this is related to your past slides, Georgi. What's the better measure, the smoothed or the non-smoothed CEIC leading indicator?
Yeah, okay, good question. So I'd say that the non-smooth CEIC leading indicator, or the actual one, is better if you're looking for month-to-month changes. So it reacts quickly to any changes in the economy because it doesn't have a smoothing factor. As we can see in June, we have this improvement in many fundamentals of the economy, and therefore the indicator jumps. So the non-smoothing indicator gives information about immediate effects in the economy. The smoothing indicator can tell you if these changes are sustainable. So if this is going to be, if the changes are going to stay for a long time after. So if you're looking for the long-term trend, better look at the smooth CEIC indicator. If you want to see immediately what's going on, then I just recommend using the non-smooth one. It's a question of perspective, I guess.
Thank you, Georgi. The other questions for Rohini, the next one, and this is as per the ICMR studies in India, we will be having a maximum number of COVID-19 cases in the month of September. So how will this impact, the majorly hit sectors in the country right now?
Well, good question. So I think the point here is not really COVID, but the COVID-19 in conjunction with the lockdown that has been that has caused such a damage to the economy. So now that the lockdown measures are lifted, there is going to be a recovery for all sectors. But what remains in place is because of COVID, the social distancing rules are going to stay in place, and there's bound to be some restrictions on traveling, and so these are some of the issues that might be, making the delayed recovery in the sector. But essentially, I don't think there's going to be any further impact because of the cases rising, because honestly, I believe that India has just accepted the fact that the numbers are going to increase, and in a country as as densely populated as India, it is bound to increase. So we have to just as authorities would have to just keep check on the social distancing measures, contact tracing. The government does say that we are not in community transmission yet, so these are all good news on the bright side. So I would say that there's not going to be any major impact from the cases increasing, because that was primarily due to the lockdown. Well, unless the government introduces another lockdown, I don't think there's going to be a major impact.
Thanks, Rohini. That's interesting. The other ones, there's another one for you, Rohini. How do you see the impact and recovery in the medical device industry? Do you see it's have a similar impact like the pharma and the healthcare sector?
Well, we haven't really covered medical devices in our research, but if I think about it, then yes, it should be having an effect similar to that in pharma and healthcare, because there is news in the country that you can use these devices to stay updated, and you can use these at home, like let's say an oximeter or something that is available for a very basic price. So oxygen cylinders perhaps for a lot of people. So I think there would be a pickup in demand for medical devices in the country, and not just from population, but from the medical fraternity as well. Of course, the cases of COVID are increasing, so there's bound to be demand. And I think overall people are more concerned about their own health and well-being. So that might further fuel the demand.
Thanks, Rohini. We are almost hitting the hour mark. Just take another question, Rohini, and that is, what are the major fiscal policy measures undertaken by the government, or is there any new fiscal policy change which you have noticed will affect most during during this period?
Thanks, Bennett. Yes, well, the fiscal stimulus package was quite large in its own, and I don't mean just the value of it. It was really varied through different sectors. The government mixed short-term and long-term measures to sort of boost the demand and supply in short-term, and then as well as take these more long-term and ensure that these industries are not performing below their potential. So like for agriculture, the Essential Commodities Act is quite a good change. I think it's very welcome by everyone, and that will attract a lot of investment in the sector as well. Maybe for some, it's difficult to really like pinpoint a few, but like let's say agri markets, the investment in agri markets is quite a big one of the big reforms, I would say. Then there's supposed to be for migrant laborers, there is this new scheme in place where they can get employed in their hometowns, and it's called the Garib Kalyan. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name exactly, but I can get back to the person who asked the question. So it's really a range of measures, and not really like just a few. Or but we can definitely take this forward and talk about the key reforms that have actually taken place.
Absolutely, Rohini. We're just hitting the hour mark. Just in the interest of time, we have received a lot of questions. There are many questions that we were not able to answer. What we will do is we'll make sure that our presenters, either Rohini or Georgi, actually responds to each of them, which we couldn't respond to. As Rohini mentioned, we will be making this report available. We will also, after this presentation, send the link to the recording as well as the report. And yes, thank you everyone for joining in. Rohini, Georgi, thank you so much for your presentation and input. It was really interesting, and we host all our recordings, our webinars on our blog sites. On the screen that you can see, you can go to ceicdata.com/en/our insights webinars, and you can access our blogs out there. Since we are sharing this presentation, this link that you see on the slide, you can access it directly from this page to see all the past webinars that we had. Again, it would really be appreciated. We will be having a short survey at the end of this webinar. Would really appreciate if you could provide your feedback to just help us create more engaging content, more content that's interesting on the topic of emerging markets. So thank you again, Rohini, thank you, Georgi, and thank you everyone for joining in. Hope to catch you all soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.